I'm Mel, and I'm a digital strategist at NPR. I work on the two-person social media team. In addition to running our shop's social accounts and strategy, we find and code tools for the newsroom to become more efficient so that they have time to actually use social. And we create and find tools that help our reporters and producers prioritize their limited time. Earlier this year, we started with this idea. We wanted to create a tool for NPR journalists to better understand our digital culture. If you're working at a new media startup, it's easy to say that analytics tools are part of your culture from the ground up. But it's a little harder at shops like my own, where there's already a culture in place. We do use Chartbeat and Google Analytics, but people don't have time to sift through Google Analytics, and even if they did, Google Analytics is really confusing. Chartbeat doesn't say a whole lot about content that's not in the top traffic getters. That's interesting, but it doesn't really help folks learn. So we had to think, if we create a tool without creating a culture that embraces that tool, does it matter if we have a tool in the first place? So we, and by we I mean Wright Bryan, who's the other member of the NPR social team, and Scott Stroud, who's a user experience designer, and myself, set out to, number one, create a product that could help our newsroom, and number two, figure out how to collect, display, and share data that would help the newsroom use, benefit, and embrace the tool. The most important part of the project was not the tool itself. It was to create what I call a sharing culture within NPR. We started doing this about 5 months before the Analytics Dashboard project began. We knew that to have success with the dashboard, people would have to notice something, take an action of some sort, like tweaking a headline, or updating a story, or sharing something on a social media platform, and then share it with the rest of our news organizations so that we could all learn. So we needed to start sharing stuff internally as a news organization. So I created a listserv. It started out as an internal listserv. All I did was praise people for doing good work on social media and on digital media. I also shared really cool stuff that other media organizations were doing, stuff that NPR could learn from. Everyone at NPR was opt-in except for management. I put all of them on because I wanted them to know what everyone was up to, and I wanted everyone to know that their managers and bosses valued this stuff. The listserv started to make people really happy. They liked being mentioned, and they started sharing more stuff with me. In turn, I became smarter in the process because people were involving me earlier in the reporting and sharing stuff they spotted online that could benefit NPR as a whole. It was a win for our entire organization. There are now 450 people on the listserv, and last month we decided to make it public. The complete archives is up on that website, and you can share it with your newsroom if you'd like. It's basically everything we're thinking about and doing and all of the tips and tricks we've learned in the social space. As well, there are cliff notes for this presentation and the full text of what I'm reading to you. The next step was to think about the dashboard itself. I work in public radio and couldn't spend money researching this. So I called up the New York Times, BuzzFeed, The Atlantic, The Huffington Post, USA Today, and The Guardian, and asked if we could come and visit and talk about what they were up to in the analytics world. They all said yes. So Wright, Scott, and I went on a field trip to New York and had very candid, open conversations where we exchanged what we were thinking and saw how they thought about analytics in their newsroom. After coming back from the other newsrooms, we shared what we learned in a brown bag lunch session at NPR, as well as on our internal and external listserv. So if you're curious about anything that we learned, you can look on that Tumblr. We talked about how we'd approach analytics in our newsroom. We also met with every show and desk head and asked individual members of each department for feedback. This kept everyone in the loop and invested in our process. Then we started to think about what UX people call personas. I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but we came up with several. Some of them were, I'm a homepage editor. I'm an editor of a section. I'm a blogger at NPR. I'm a radio reporter. I'm a producer. And then we sketched out what each of them might need from a dashboard because each of those people might need something different. It was really important to think about what our audience, which in this case was our own newsroom, might need, because if you build a tool and the newsroom finds it difficult to understand, difficult to use, difficult to access, difficult because of your company culture, or difficult to share, then what's the point? And I didn't mention this. When I pitched the project, I was given 6 weeks of development resources. That's not a lot of time. Most newsrooms have a full-time person doing this all of the time. So we had to think. How do we get the most impact for what we can build? What's the most bang for our buck with limited resources, staffing, and time? We don't have time to be everywhere, and to think that our reporters can add more stuff to their plates without having a better sense of what to prioritize doesn't realistically address my newsroom or other smaller newsrooms' needs. So we set out to write our general assumptions about a tool because, as Scott pointed out, this would help us narrow our focus because we only had 6 weeks to work. The first assumption had nothing to do with the tool itself. It was a change in NPR's culture is equally as important as building a useful tool. We want to empower individual journalists by providing them the tools and information they need. We believe our social media strategy should be centered around individual empowerment. We want to empower our journalists to build their own individual presences on social media. We want our beat reporters, producers, and editors to become established leaders within their topic areas regardless of the platform they're using. And we want to provide our newsroom with the proper tools and training. This may seem like common sense at a new media startup, but there are many more challenges at a non-startup and legacy organization. There's an existing culture in place and there's a framework in place. So change can come, but it comes slowly and usually involves, number 1, getting in trouble, number 2, not minding getting in trouble, and number 3, meetings. I go to a lot of meetings. I also get in trouble a lot. This is just part of the process, and you just have to deal with it. The other assumptions that we made through the process, the tools we create should help us understand and expand the core audience. We assume that the tool must evolve over time, and we should start with the most impactful solution. And back to sharing. We want people to be able to share insights from the dashboard and share somewhere that everyone at NPR can see in real time so that we can take meaningful action with the limited amount of time that we have. We also did a lot of thinking about ways to best integrate the product with our CMS and people's workflows. We could create a bookmarklet. We could link the product within our CMS. And we could think about the landing page specifically, because what users see on the landing page would determine what they thought about our product. We found it was really helpful to assign everyone in the newsroom a role, and then we thought about what they would do if they noticed something on the dashboard. For example, let's say I'm a homepage editor, and I learn a piece from our archives is spiking from the dashboard. Then should I put it back on the homepage, update the page itself, let the social team know, and so on. And then we made a chart of these things. If I have job X and I learn Y, then I should do Z. This is a really good way to think. If I have a dashboard, how do I want my audience, and in this case my newsroom, to engage with it? Our other thought was about sharing. Is there a way to build a dashboard so that if someone notices something, they can share with the rest of the newsroom? My colleague Wright Bryan came up with this idea, and I love it. Ideally, this involves the landing page I mentioned before. It would have images of unusual audience behaviors that people could see as soon as they access the tool, so they would always be learning and seeing what their coworkers did. We're not there yet. That may not be built in the time that we have because we only have 6 weeks. That's an ideal state that might be many months or even years away, but we have to be realistic about what we can do right now. What we're thinking about right now, because we're in the middle of this project, is there a way to learn from the tool out loud? Is there a way to build actions into the tool to prompt people in my newsroom into action and then share with their coworkers? We're priming the newsroom to share what they learn in the tool, even if the tool isn't in its ideal state at the end of 6 weeks. And we plan to share everything we learn with other news organizations we met and to keep the conversation ongoing. Next, we're thinking back to sharing with the public. Is there a way to make part of this tool public so that the audience is also involved? Is there a dashboard that would make the experience more meaningful for our audience? Again, is there a way to learn from our tool out loud? I think we have to. We've been using agile development throughout this process, but analytics also requires agile thinking and being able to share and change and iterate and then share again. So if you work on analytics and you can help out in any way, please let me know. I'm always up for sharing ideas and hearing yours. I would love to integrate the way you're thinking into what we're sharing and sharing online and sharing with our newsroom, and I'm happy to share with your newsrooms. I'm M. Kramer on Twitter. I'm Melody Kramer on GitHub. All of the code that we write is accessible to everyone. We make everything public. I'm mkramer at npr.org. If you're in DC, I'm a tour guide at NPR. I can give you a tour. And I'm going to sit down. So.